The same parts of your brain that would fire if you were going to do an action in real life will fire up in an fMRI machine or light up in an fMRI machine if you read about that action in a narrative. I always use the example of you're reading a story about Jack kicking a ball, the same part of your brain will light up in an MRI machine as if you were actually kicking a ball yourself.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Vandal Theory, a podcast about science and research at University of Idaho. I'm your host for the day. My name is Danae Lenz. I'm the External Communications Coordinator at U of I, and I'm joined by my lovely co-host, as always, Lee. Hi, Lee.
Hi, Danae. I'm Lee Cooper, science writer and editor here at University of Idaho. Last episode of the season. Gosh, they go by so fast.
They do. So we've got a really cool topic today. We're talking about narrative and sustainability and how those things connect. It's very cool. So to kick us off, I have a question, and I was wondering if you have ever struggled to decipher what a scientific paper is trying to say.
Absolutely. For 2 years, this was basically my entire job. I was given a handful of papers between 5 and 10 a week and told to summarize them for journalists, and that was my entire job. I'd sit down with markers and highlighters and work my way through it, Google a lot of terms, and put together summaries.
Yeah, so I've never had a job like that, but I do every once in a while as part of my job at U of I, someone will send over a paper and be like, write a press release. And I have to figure out what it's saying, and I do not have a scientific minded brain at all. So today we're going to talk to someone who she does a lot of things, but she also works with scientists to try to get them to communicate their messages better. Today we're talking to Erin James. She's a professor of English in U of I's College of Letters, Arts, and Social Sciences. She's also the director of the university's Sustainability Certificate and co-director of the Confluence Lab. In this episode, she explores how storytelling shapes the way we understand the environment and why interdisciplinary collaboration across sciences, humanities, and beyond is key to tackling complex sustainability challenges. Are you ready to get into it?
Let's dive in.
Hi, Erin. Welcome to the Vandal Theory.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Can you start off by just giving us a little bit of an introduction to yourself?
I'm a professor in the English department. I've been at U of I since 2012. I'm also affiliate faculty in environmental science, and I direct the sustainability certificate on campus. My kind of bag, I guess, academic bag is that I think about storytelling and the environment, and in particular, the role that storytelling might play in mitigating environmental crisis, but also this role that storytelling might play in exacerbating environmental crisis.
The term for that kind of study is narratology, correct?
Yeah, narratology is like the science of stories, right? Or narrative. I'm going to use those two terms interchangeably today for ease. But yeah, so narratology is a kind of, some would say, deeply unsexy corner of literary criticism. A group of scholars are asking a couple of key questions. So the first is, what is narrative, or what is a story, and what makes it different from other forms of communication? And then what are the common building blocks of narrative, like types of narrators, types of characters, types of settings, that kind of stuff? And how can we begin to codify those so that we have a kind of vocabulary by which to talk about narratives in a more scientific way?
Talk a little bit more about why narrative and how you say things matters.
Yeah, that's a huge question. There are many different types of narratology or narrative theory, but one of the conversations that I like to hang out in is one called cognitive narrative theory. So that is the study of literally what's happening in your brain when you are reading or watching or listening to or even telling a story. And there's all sorts of really interesting cognitive science that's coming out of these collaborations between cognitive scientists and narrative scholars. But one of the things that we're noticing is that the same parts of your brain that would fire if you were going to do an action in real life will fire up in an fMRI machine or light up in an fMRI machine if you read about that action in a narrative, right? I always use the example if you're reading a story about Jack kicking a ball, the same part of your brain will light up in an MRI machine as if you were actually kicking a ball yourself. And so there's all sorts of theorization that comes out of this, but one of the big arguments is that narrative is used by humans as like this safe offline context in which to practice and rehearse a bunch of things. One of them is wayfinding. We practice or simulate moving around in specific environments so that it becomes easier to do so in the real world. Another thing is we practice trying on the emotions of characters. We have to understand what Jack feels when he kicks the ball to understand the story, right? Or else we really are confused. It doesn't make sense to us. So, this idea that narrative is this almost like muscle that we use, that we exercise to try on the emotions and the thoughts and feelings of other characters. It makes it easier for us to relate to people in the real world. The lazy English professor's argument is that reading makes you a better person because you are trying all these emotions. I don't necessarily believe that. There's all sorts of complications to think about there, but that's one reason that I find narrative really fascinating. And it's almost an evolutionary argument. Human cultures across time and space have evolved to be storytelling cultures because it allows us to rehearse and simulate and practice in this really essential way that then makes it much easier to actually do the things that we do when we are not reading, watching, listening, telling stories.
So obviously, I've heard when you read things, you understand more about the world. You can kind of put yourself in another person's shoes. But the fact that your brain is like, oh, I'm kicking the ball, that's bonkers.
It's really wild, right? There's all sorts of different ways of studying this. So one is to like actually put undergraduate students in fMRI machines and like make them read Jane Austen novels or Dick and Jane stories. No one's allowed me to do this yet, but if anyone out there is willing to load me in an MRI machine, I'm like, I'm so down for this, right? So that's one way to study, and that's has to do with like the brain lighting up like you would see in a typical image of an MRI scan. There are lots of other ways of demonstrating this kind of cognitive and imaginative work that narrative demands for us. So eye tracking surveys when people are reading that show when they are really, really invested in what they're looking at as opposed to when they begin to drift, pre and post reading surveys, all sorts of stuff, right? But yeah, it's a really, really fascinating corner of literature and literary studies that moves considerations of literature from these are great stories. We feel good when we read these stories, or these stories are important because they teach us about, humanity, blah, 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 to, yeah, there's actually an evolutionary reason why humans spend so much time telling, watching, listening, reading stories. It's kind of a weird thing to do, right? To spend that much time in these kind of imagined worlds. For me, that is well, it makes English and literature and narrative so essential to our lives, right? It's just a really, really rich way to think about why stories are important.
Yeah. You're involved in this thing called the Confluence Lab. Can you just tell us what that is and how it came about?
Sure. Yeah. So the Confluence Lab is a group that I co-founded with a couple colleagues back in 2019. And those colleagues are Jen Medino, who's my dear friend and my buddy in the English department, and then Teresa Cavazos Cullen, who at the time was based in the College of Natural Resources at U of I. She's since gone on to take a job at the University of New Hampshire. But it came from this shared anxiety that Jen and I were feeling on the humanities side of the kind of science arts divide, and Teresa was feeling on the science side, which is we were thinking about the environment and we were thinking about particularly climate change and climatology and how there was just an abundance of scientific data and evidence to suggest that climate change is happening and the environment is changing. And yet that data wasn't doing a lot to shift public opinion or behavior. And so Jen and I started talking to Teresa, and we said, we think as people who study culture and study humans, you were humanists, we have something to contribute here. The lab has grown to become an interdisciplinary initiative. We almost think of ourselves as an incubator, almost, right? An interdisciplinary initiative that's trying to come up with new, fresh ways to study divisive environmental issues in rural communities, such as the ones that we live in Idaho. But it's a little bit unique in that it really tries to create room for the arts and the humanities from the very beginning of studying an environmental issue or an environmental problem. As humanities scholars, Jen and I were really used to scientists doing their science and then coming to us and say, like, hey, can you help us communicate this to the public? Or can you help us, edit a newsletter so that people will care about what we're doing? That's great. But we are looking for something a little bit more ambitious where we want to use the tools and the equipment of the arts and the humanities to kind of help design new research projects that would take seriously the idea that contemporary environmental issues are just as much or even more so cultural issues as they are ecological issues.
What kinds of projects are you working on within the lab?
So we have had a couple of major projects since we launched in 2019. We kind of stumbled backwards a bit into working on wildfire. So our two main projects, one was funded by the National Science Foundation, the other was funded by the Mellon Foundation, which is a national philanthropic foundation. They were both looking at wildfire as one of these environmental issues that really impacts rural communities, particularly in the West. The first one, which confusingly, you think as humanities people, we'd be better at coming up with project names, but confusingly, the projects both have the same name, which is Stories of Fire. So the first Stories of Fire project was work that we were doing with state park interpreters, where we were helping to train and work with state park interpreters to create more interactive storytelling environments at parks when they were delivering information about wildfires to the public. So I don't know if you've had this experience. I grew up on the east coast of Canada, and my experience was when we went camping, we'd get bored eventually and we'd wander over to the amphitheater and the campsite. And it was always lectures about moose when I was growing up, right? But the ranger would just get up there and give you like a talk about moose, and then you'd leave. That was the evening's entertainment. We were thinking, because of this research that suggests that narrative is this kind of thinking tool, right? And in particular, people retain information or tend to retain information when they participate in the telling of the story of that information. We were thinking we can do something different than this that would perhaps encourage people to participate more in these conversations about wildfire and then also take away different types of information. They might also, as people who have stories about wildfire, as almost everyone does in the West these days, right? They might have crucial information that can be passed along to science practitioners, park interpreters, who then can use that in their own study of wildfire. So that was the first Stories of Fire project. The second one was much more of an art-focused project. So this is the one funded by the Mellon Foundation. We call it an atlas. It's really a kind of digital art project in which we were curating and commissioning new representations of fire in the Pacific Northwest. Part of this was just literally through a program that we were calling the Artists in Fire Residency, paying artists to become trained to become type 2 firefighters and make art about this, which is really cool. Part of it was hosting digital art exhibits on our website. Part of it was running workshops in communities that had been recently affected by fire to use the tools of art and particularly map making to imagine resilient futures in the aftermath of these fires. And so that was a very cool project as well. Those are the two big ones that we have been working on.
In addition to those, you also have some interns who are doing something kind of cool, right?
Yeah, we have an intern army. It's so fantastic. So, two projects that we're working on right now, just quickly. One is continuing to work on fire. It's a manuscript project that we're calling the Fire Humanities, where we are getting scholars from around the world who are humanities specialists to think about what it's like to be a humanities person who's studying fire and what we can contribute to these conversations about fire. But the interns are connected to this other project that we're working on that we're calling narrative science. This goes back to our initial conversations about the anxiety about scientists producing data and not being able to disseminate it in the way that they like. Jen and I have both been working with a team of interns semester by semester to train those interns in narrative literacy, so narrative theory. Jen is a specialist in emotions and affect theory, so she's giving them training on emotions and the science of emotions and affect. We ask those interns to collaborate with a science practitioner on a piece of writing. I'll talk about one of the collaborations that I've done, for example. I was working with a biophysicist from the University of Washington who had written a grant that had not been successful, and he wanted to revise the grant and resubmit. And so we started paying a lot of attention to the opening of the grant and how we could help the people who were reading and reviewing the grant do this kind of imaginative and simulative work that narrative is so powerful at to more easily step into the project, right? Understand the project. We spent a lot of time talking about how to tell the project differently by harnessing the tools of stories. That project to me is really exciting. It's both using the power of stories to communicate and disseminate scientific work. My hypothesis, which we're still testing out, is also that science practitioners who train to become better storytellers are also more likely to become better receivers of stories and therefore open themselves up to finding data in stories in the kind of unusual places that they might not have been able to interact with in the same way before this kind of specialized training.
What does it look like in the, like, nitty-gritty details? Are you helping these people create a character out of what they're working on? What does that look like?
Well, so one of the things that I've been working on with the interns over the last couple semesters is testing out different tools and figuring out exactly how we're going to be doing these consultations. The thing that we've come around to working with is what we call the story prism audit. If you can imagine like a prism, right? White light goes in and the different constituent colors are refracted out. We think of this, but in terms of narrative being equivalent to the white light, and then the different constituents of narrative, right? So characters, a setting, events that are happening, a sense of how it feels, someone who is telling the story, right? Those kind of, are the equivalent to the colors that come out of the prism. So what we do is we'd sit down with a science practitioner and we would get them to tell us the story of their work, either by looking at a piece of writing that they've done or just saying, like, tell me about what you're doing. And we do a bit of an audit. Which colors are really strong that are coming out of the prism and which are pretty muted and could be much brighter. And then we would home in on the thing that we think we could bump up to make that story more effective and richer so that it's easier for the people who are receiving the story to kind of simulate what you're talking about and therefore understand what you're talking about. Sometimes it's focused on character. Sometimes it's focused on, this story that you're telling me about proteins, I can't imagine the setting of what's happening here. Can you tell me more about where in time and space this is happening, right? Sometimes it's much more focused on trying to articulate a sense of how it feels to do this work or how it feels for one of the subjects that you're studying to like go through these experiments, right? It's kind of tailored to each conversation. But yes, characters is often a big part of it.
As someone who has to sort through a lot of heavy scientific topics as part of my job, I really appreciate this.
Yes. I'll give you one example. Again, this is from another biophysicist, a separate one that we were working with, but she studies proteins and she's, modeling proteins and she had this kind of aha moment where she was like, "Oh my god, what if I told the story of this work from the perspective of the protein,
Mhm.
right? So the main character was not her as the biophysicist, but the protein itself, right? And this really radically changed the way that she talked about her work. The scale changed, the setting changed, right? But it was amazing how legible and accessible the work became once she made that shift into thinking about what it was like for the protein to like have things happen to it and make things happen. And so, yeah, that's just one quick example of the type of work that we've done in the past.
I love that. I do want to transition a little bit into some other work that you do with students. Can you tell us about this sustainability certificate?
Yeah. So here's another hat that I wear, which is director of the sustainability certificate. But it's coming out of this same intense desire for interdisciplinary approaches to environmental issues that is at the bedrock of the Confluence Lab. So, a couple years ago, I became part of a faculty group that was designing a 12 credit certificate for in sustainability for undergraduate students at the University of Idaho. And we were doing this for a few reasons. One, the students were demanding it and, expressing intense interest. But two, there's also lots of really interesting job research to suggest that students who finish their degree with a green credential are much more employable and much more likely to find employment after graduation. The sustainability certificate is kind of a unicorn on campus, as it is one of the only programs that is open and available to all undergraduate students. So it doesn't matter what your major is. You can be a history major or a mechanical engineering major or an accounting major. You can earn this certificate. You can think of the certificate as having a series of different required buckets, right? So students have to take 3 credits from each of these buckets. There's an ecological sustainability bucket, a social sustainability bucket, a economic sustainability bucket, and then something that we call the core integrative bucket, which would be looking at all facets of sustainability. And there's a broad range of courses in every bucket. So there's many, many pathways that you can take to get through the sustainability certificate. It's been incredibly successful since we launched a year and a half ago. Our goal was to have 70 students go through the certificate in 5 years, and we are far beyond halfway to that mark after a year and a half. So it's been really fun to see it grow and thrive on campus.
What are the students saying about it? Are they really enjoying this?
Yeah, the students are really enjoying it. So we've gotten 3 bits of feedback from students. One, yay, this is great. And we're so happy that we can get this micro credential. This is really great. The second, which has been interesting, is that as I'm visiting a whole bunch of different classes that are involved in the certificates, there's often graduate students who are taking these classes, and the graduate students are saying, like, well, where's my version of this certificate? So, one of our big jobs this year was to create a graduate level sustainability certificate. It should be available next year, right? So, it should be in next year's catalog. So, that's really great. So, now undergrads and graduate students can access this micro credential. The third bit of feedback that we've been getting, and this is consistent with the strategic plan for the university, right, is that students are looking for some hands on experiential learning connected to sustainability. Smaller projects are often built into the courses that are affiliated with a sustainability certificate, but we've also, myself and the faculty group who are at the helm of the certificate, have also designed a brand new class that will be offered for the first time next year that's affiliated with the certificate called the Sustainability Challenge. This course, like the certificate itself, will be open to any student, any major on campus. And it'll task these interdisciplinary cohorts of students with grappling with a real live sustainability issue on our campus. So, something like, okay, your task for this semester is to design a campus wide compost program. Like, what does that look like? Or your task for this semester is to design a ecologically, economically, and socially sustainable bike rental program on campus. What does that look like? So I'm really, really excited to teach that for the first time next year. It's going to be awesome. It's going to get people really thinking about how to connect what they are learning about sustainability in their home discipline to the actual day-to-day functioning of the university.
What are the benefits of someone like an English major interacting with the engineering major? What do you see come out of those partnerships?
Yeah, so first of all, the students just have to learn how to work in an unruly team, right? An undisciplined team, not in like a badly behaved team, but a team that is not all coming from the same discipline. And that's a really invaluable lesson in teamwork that will prepare them well for the job market. But the second, I think, more important or more interesting thing for me, I do really fundamentally believe that because sustainability issues are often just as much cultural issues as they are ecological or economic issues, it really takes an all hands on deck approach in which you have people who have some training in social, knowledge, right? Whether it's sociology or English or history, you have people who are thinking economically about how these things can be sustainable, and you have people thinking ecologically about how these things can be sustainable. Without that mix of people, you don't have a sustainable project because you're not paying attention to environment plus market plus behavior, right? So we need to be thinking about all three.
That's really exciting.
I'm really, really pumped for this. I'm itching to teach it next year.
Before we go, I just want to open the floor to you and ask you, what do you most want people to take away from this conversation?
I think two things. So, one, stories are awesome, but they're more than just entertainment, right? And so many of us could think differently about the role that stories play in the way that we navigate the world and navigate the social networks that we live in, right? So that's one thing I want to suggest. I think the other thing that I want to suggest is to encourage people to think as broadly and ambitiously as possible about interdisciplinary activities. Often, when we think of interdisciplinary projects, it's something that joins what we're studying or specializing in with maybe our neighbor, something that is combining English and history. And that's great. There's absolutely place for that. But I really thrive on the interdisciplinary projects that bring together, English philosophy and physics. What do those people have to say to each other? It turns out that often when you get those folks in the same room at the same table together, they have a lot to say to each other. And all of their work tends to improve by talking across those disciplines. And so, yeah, come join the interdisciplinary teams. Yeah, they're really, really fun places to hang out.
Thanks so much for being on the podcast. This has been really awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Okay, Lee, what did you think about that conversation?
I loved every minute of that. I love the idea that when you're reading, you're practicing the emotions and perspective of the characters that you're encountering, and that can help you in real life situations when you either encounter similar situations or maybe similar perspectives as that character that you've read about. That's just a fabulous idea. And I think it's true. I mean, I certainly have taken things from what I've read and applied them to my life.
It's wild to me if you're reading about someone kicking a ball and it lights up the same part of your brain as if you were kicking the ball. That is so crazy to me. And then it got me thinking, I was wondering if I could trick my body into thinking I was actually outside, working out.
If only the assassin montage of learning and training and becoming amazing also made me amazing at all of that with, abs of steel. That would be incredible. I'd love that for me. Otherwise, I am super excited to see what her students do for their sustainability class. I'm really excited to see their project.
Yeah, and I really like that she emphasized how good it is to interact and work with people who do not have your same area of expertise. There's just so many benefits to that, and it's always good to have that discussion.
Absolutely. Again, going back to the different perspectives, you get to hear about different ideas and different ways of thinking about problems, and it's super helpful.
Okay, everyone, thank you for listening to this season of the Vandal Theory. You can visit our website at uidaho.edu/vandaltheory to learn more about our research. Email us at vandaltheory@uidaho.edu. We are on all the podcasting platforms, so please rate and review and subscribe. I'm Danae Lenz.
And I'm Lee Cooper.
See you next season.